I'd vote you out in a second.
Good
And don't
morning.
forget,
It's Shabbat, and I'm so glad to be with you this morning. I'm Rabbi Ed Feinstein, joined by my loquacious friends, Rabbi Sherre Hirsch, Vice President for Innovation of the American Jewish University here in Los Angeles, and Rabbi Marc Gellman, who is currently residing in Florida. It's come to my attention that not everyone who's watching knows these wonderful rabbis. I'm sorry that I haven't done my diligence and introduced the two of them. So let me do that if I can for just a moment. Sherre, I know a long time. I knew when she was Sherre Zwelling. She was my student in the university when she was studying for the rabbinate. And upon her graduation, she became one of the rabbis of the Sinai Temple here in Los Angeles and distinguished herself in that position. Then went on to become the program director, I think educational program director for Hillel worldwide, and is now the vice president of innovation for the American Jewish University, and has an audience of thousands and thousands of people learning with her and the programs that she puts on week to week through Biachad, which is the online presence of the American Jewish University. So Sherre, did I do that? And she's also the mom of five actually delicious children,
thank
three
you.
of whom
I actually
had the
say
joy of bar mitzvahing. And
there's,
and
I just have to say thank you for that. But what was really how I know you is that you set my mother up with my stepfather, and you also
yes,
buried my mother. And I am forever indebted to you as a rabbi.
well, your mother was someone who I loved very, very dearly, and was such a fine and wonderful soul. And you were a damn good rabbinical student when I had you. So,
Thank you.
and
And
I'm proud that you.
my mother was something other in this world.
Yes, true. That's very true. And now Rabbi Marc Gellman. And I want to apologize to Marc because I think people got the wrong impression from my facetious comments. Rabbi Gellman was the youngest rabbi ordained by Hebrew Union College. He was for many years the rabbi of Temple Beth Torah of Melville, New York, and at the same time, president of the New York Board of Rabbis and a member of a wonderful program called the God Squad. He shared this appearance, this program, with Father Tom Hartman, a Catholic priest, and they were on Good Morning America. They were on Imus in the morning. They appeared all over New York and all over the world, actually, teaching the best of Jewish and Catholic traditions, Jewish and Christian traditions together. Marc's also was the religion reporter for Good Morning America. Um, and now he is retired to Florida, where he is very comfortable. And when I facetiously introduced him as the chief rabbi of Golf Digest, I wasn't exactly off. He really is a
Wow.
writer for Golf Digest. And as far as I know, the only rabbi. I understand that Jack Nicholas is studying for smicha. So you might have some competition soon, but it won't be for quite a while. So, Marc, welcome this morning. Did I get the introduction
Thank
correct?
you. Thank you. It's good to hear your eulogy. You should always hear your eulogy before you're dead.
No,
My
no, no,
basic
no. God
conviction
forbid.
for them. So
God
thank you
forbid.
for giving me my eulogy before I'm dead.
God forbid. So this morning we opened the Torah to Parshat Beshalach, which is a remarkable Torah portion. It's one of the portions I have to say that I'm only sad that it's only a week. It would be one of the portions I would want to spend 3 weeks on because it has these moments in it which are truly cinematic, truly spectacular. This is the last episode of the Exodus from Egypt. In last week's Torah portion, our people left Egypt and started out into the desert. In this Torah portion, we're told that they're not going to go the short way, they're going to go quite the long way, and they arrive at the boundaries of the Red Sea. And that's when Pharaoh, for the 11th time, changes his mind and comes down to destroy this people. They complain to Moses, and you have to know something that even though death is right behind them, imminent, Jews will always find an opportunity to kvetch. And the kvetch is so beautifully, it's a soliloquy you should hear. And Moses says, watch the salvation of God. Moses is instructed to hold his hand across the sea. The sea splits. If you haven't read the book, you have surely seen the movie. The sea splits. The people of Israel cross in safety and they are saved and they begin their journey through the desert into freedom. It's not an easy journey. It's a very difficult journey. And we get a foreshadowing of the difficulties at the very end of this Torah portion, both the internal difficulties of dealing with the stresses of the desert and the wilderness, And the external difficulties, the approach of Amalek, the destroyer, the first enemy of the people Israel. It is a Torah portion filled with the surprise of the crossing of the sea, with the surprise of of God's salvation, with the surprise of the sadness, the difficulties of hunger and thirst in the desert, with the surprise of the first enemy coming at us, all of these surprises. And it is therefore a deeply emotional Torah portion with a sort of roller coaster, as it were, of emotions. I think that it's important this morning to focus on those moments of surprise. Sherre, talk to us this morning about surprise in this Torah portion.
Well, I was speaking to you earlier, both of you, about how I got surprised this week. And I was reminded of it as I was preparing for today about about Moses carrying Joseph's bones. And I got a call from a congregant, and her mother died unexpectedly. She had got COVID, even though she had been completely social distancing from the very beginning. And she discovered that she couldn't bury her mother in the traditional way because if you've had COVID, you have to be buried in a bag and not a shroud. And I was really taken aback because for me, it was like the example I used was like the day before the liberation, right? All the people, all the Jews that died the day before liberation, it felt like it was in vain. And then this sucker punch of, oh my God, you're not going to be able to bury your mother the way that all Jews bury. And so she was sharing with me how upset she was, and I was equally upset. And I realized like 20 years into being a rabbi, and I'm constantly surprised. Like the level of grief that we're experiencing now is all these new surprises that I didn't anticipate. People once asked me, as the longer I do funerals, does the easier it gets because you know how it works? And I said, no, the harder it gets because I know the people and feel for them deeply. But this week was even a deeper cut, so to speak, because you can't bury her in a shroud. I can't even do what's required in Jewish law. And it threw me. And I think when we talk about surprises, this Parsha is a surprise, and yet it forces us to direct our attention so significantly on that life keeps surprising us.
So let me ask you a question from the Parsha's point of view, because I deeply appreciate what you've said. Before we can cross the Red Sea, before we can come to the other side, before we can sing a song of freedom, do we have to process the grief of generations and generations of slavery and the humiliations and the oppression and the pain that we carry in our bodies? And the reason I ask that question is because, this week, there are different dates of the year when we remember the Holocaust. Jews remember the Holocaust typically right after Pesach as part of Yom HaShoah, the day of the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. But today, this week was the day of the international remembrance because it was the day that the Auschwitz concentration camp was liberated. And the question I wonder is, how much has the Jewish people suffered because we have never really finished the grieving, if it's even possible to finish the grieving from an event as traumatic, as painful, as radically difficult as Shoah. And can you ever move forward? I mean, in the Torah portion, there's a literal moving forward. Can you ever move forward without having processed the grief? How did you help the family through this moment?
So you asked three very important questions that I want to break apart. First is, can you finish grieving? And I would argue that you're never finished grieving. The second is, can you process the grief? And I would argue that our whole life is a series of processing grief, right? And the third question is, how did I counsel them? And when I said to her, that this was a moment where things are not in vain, even if it feels like it's in vain, that her mother being able to bury her and grieve her and keep her memory alive was a moment of which it was a life well lived. And we talked about it. I don't know if I brought comfort. I don't know if God will brought comfort. I think it's going to be a life and process of grieving. But I think this idea that we get over grief or that we finish grief is false. And I also think that sometimes we say that the country of Israel is a country in grief. You know, we talk a lot about that, that as Jews, we are part of our identity has an aspect of grieving, and that that's not a negative. That's just an aspect of our soul that I think in many ways forces us to make our lives more meaningful, to be more empathetic, to be more compassionate, because like we know the stranger, we also know grief.
Marc, the Parsha includes a different moment of surprise, a moment of redemption. But it does carry I think it carries an element of surprise. Death is coming from behind, from the Pharaoh. The sea is ahead of us. We see no way out. Moses says, "Follow me into the water." And then there is this moment, the cinematic miracle of the water splitting, or whether he just knew how to get through a swamp. The fact is that at that moment, redemption comes as a complete and utter surprise, and the people feel it. What happens to them?
Well, look, it's sort of like the story that Sherre was just saying. It's in the face of grief, you have a choice. In the face of life and its challenges, no matter what they are, you have a choice. And that choice is, to put it in a visual metaphor, stark and real and simple. The choice is you look down or you look up. You look down or you look up. Looking down means you focus on the negative qualities of the events that are surrounding you. And that's what happened to the people of Israel on the shores of the sea when they are being pursued by Pharaoh. And they turn to Moses and they say, "Were there not enough graves in Egypt that you took us out here to die at the hand of Pharaoh? What's happening here?" And the reason that they're so angry is that they lack the capacity to look up. They still are consumed by the false religious belief. False, and I would say corrosive, and in the case of the Torah, tragically destructive. And that belief is that God is nothing other than a more powerful Pharaoh, and that God is worthy to be worshiped only if God does things for you in advance that prove that God is real in this world. There is no religion that can survive that test, including Judaism. The missing element, which is one that God, from the very beginning of God's calling Moses, tries to include as the centerpiece of the Exodus, is faith. Is faith in God, who hasn't done anything for you yet, or who has done many things for you, but you just don't see it. And so that's what's missing. And then when they go through the sea, there's this wonderful midrash in Shemot Rabbah in 24:3, where Shimon and Reuben are going through the sea and they don't see the miracle. And the rabbi says, "Why couldn't they see the miracle? They're in the middle of it." They say, because they didn't see the miracle because they never looked up. And so all they saw was mud. And that is the choice in this period of COVID, which is our exodus from illness and pandemic. It's the same choice as well. If all we see is problems with distribution, people who can't be buried in shrouds, they have to be buried in a body bag, and that's insulting to our traditions. If that's all we can see, then there's no hope for us. What we have to be able to see is that there's a world for this dear woman who passed. May her memory be for a blessing. And that future for that woman's soul is a place where there are no body bags, where there are no shrouds, and where souls are received by God and by the holy and the righteous. And that's the world we have to believe in, because that's what our religion teaches. And that's what God is offering. God is offering a way to look up. And after they go through the Red Sea, it's very interesting. There's this one brief moment of pure faith among the people. And it's preceded and say, Ve'aminu b'Adonai, and they believed in God and in Moses, his servant. But before that, which is often quoted, it says they looked up. They looked up. And then they believed in God. So at that one moment, they were able to look up to the source of all of this, the plagues, the miracles, the Exodus, and they were able to see, yes, it wasn't just God's force, God's power. The Yad Chazakah, which Moses demands that God give him as a weapon against Pharaoh. It was the Zroya Netuya, it was the outstretched arm, the arm of a father, a mother, a parent who receives us and takes us to God and surrounds us with hope and with love. And that's the choice that faith represents. That's why that's the role of clergy, is to give people hope in the face of death, to give them hope in the face of despair. There are millions of reasons to lose hope. There are millions of reasons to look down. There's plenty of mud in the world, but they don't need us to point to the mud. They feel the mud, they see the mud, they're in the mud. They need us to look up, and we need God to have a reason to look up. That's what we're doing here.
That's a wonderful sermon, a wonderful drasha. Thank you. There's a wonderful midrash on that line. The line in the Torah is Vayaminu b'Adonai b'Moshavdo, and they believed in God and Moses his servant. And there's a discussion in the midrash among the rabbis, and one of the rabbis plays a sort of devil's advocate and says, why does it tell us they believed in God and Moses? They just saw the sea split. They just saw the greatest miracle that any people have ever seen. And these are the same people that saw 10 plagues descend from heaven and destroy Pharaoh. These are the same people that saw all the things that Moses did in Egypt. Of course they believed in God. And of course they trusted Moses. Why did it have to say that? And the answer is because they had been slaves for so long. They had been slaves and seen so many horrors, so much oppression, so much of their humanity had been beat out of them, that the fact that they were willing to follow Moses into a tomorrow, that they were willing to follow Moses into an indeterminate tomorrow, not knowing how the story would come to an end, not knowing if the sea would split. They were willing to follow him into the sea, not knowing if they would ever come out again. The fact that they were willing to trust and say, I choose tomorrow over yesterday. And I'm willing to face the uncertainties and insecurities of an indeterminate tomorrow in order to escape the brutal determinacy of slavery. The fact that they were willing to believe that things were possible, that hope was possible, that a better life was possible. That is the greatest miracle of all of Jewish history. That the miracle of their change of heart, of the opening of the heart, was a bigger miracle than the opening of the sea.
Amen.
It's a beautiful midrash, and I'll just add a postscript to it. Again, given the celebration, the commemoration of this last week, had the Jewish people at the end of the war, the end of World War II, thrown up our hands in the air and said, "Okay, enough, we're finished." 6 million, 1 million Jewish children, 90% of all the rabbis in the world murdered. 90% of all the Jewish books in the world destroyed, 90% of all the Torah scrolls in the world destroyed, 90% of all the Jewish schools and synagogues in the world destroyed. If the Jewish people at the end of the war had said, this proves once and for all, there is no hope, and there is no reason to maintain loyalty to this faith and tradition, that would have been the reasonable thing to do. You remember Madeleine Albright became Secretary of State, and shortly after she became Secretary of State, she announced that she'd made a discovery that her parents were Jewish. Now, what her parents did, many did actually, they were so terrified by the events in Europe that they hid their Jewishness so that their daughter would never grow up with the stigma of having to hide. That's what they were most afraid of. And they raised her as a whatever, Episcopalian, Presbyterian. That's normal. What's not normal are all of us who stepped up and said, I'm still going to be, Afal Pichein V'Lamrot HaKol, I'm still going to be Jewish. That, to me, is the greatest miracle in all of Jewish history. The greatest miracle of all of Jewish history. The fact that we came out of the war and said, and I'm still going to pursue this tradition, teach that human beings are created in the image of God, teach, as you said so beautifully, that there's hope, that redemption is a possibility. I refuse to continue to look down into the concentration camps and the crematoria and the gas chambers and the Nazi insignia. I'm going to look up toward heaven and say, the world is still filled with possibilities for my children, and I'm not going to let go of the faith and wisdom of my ancestors. That's a great miracle. Vayaminu b'Adonai. We still believe. Ub'moshav do, and we learn Moshe's Torah. And that, to me, is the greatest miracle in all of Jewish history, which means that every year when I do Hanukkah, I always add another bracha. Sh'asa nisim lavoseinu bayamim ha'hem uzman hazeh u'biyamenu anu. For God who did miracles for our ancestors at this time of year long ago, and in our time too. Because in our time too, at Hanukkah and at Purim, and every time we say that bracha, I think we have to look up, recognize the miracle of the fact that we're just still here. That we're actually just still here. Sherre, you're next.
Amen. Now, a question, Eddie, a question. How is it that this newly inspired people, this people infused with the power of faith, the very next verse, not the next chapter, not the next book, but the next verse, say, oh, and by the way, we want meat. We want meat and we want water, but we want meat, and you know what? We want garlic too. And then this whole what happens to the faith, and then there's the story of the waters of Meribah, and then Moses has to hit the rock and get water for the people. But why, if this is such a miracle that the people believed in God, finally, at the end of the Exodus from Egypt, or that part of the Exodus, why do they lose faith so quickly, Ed?
I would just jump in here, Marc.
Please.
Is the assumption is that you get faith or you lose faith. It doesn't recognize that our whole life is this balancing act of looking up, looking down, looking right, looking left, looking up, looking down, looking right, looking left, right? It's this balancing act of acquiring possibility, then feeling defeated, and then having another moment that lets you see the light, so to speak, and then pursuing that, and then again being crushed by it. And that, I think, is more the human experience of faith. And when you mentioned Hanukkah, Eddie, I was thinking about the miracle was that they still wanted to light, right? That the fact that we still want to do this, but that sometimes we have ambivalence about it. I can honestly tell you, every Friday I look forward to Shabbat, but some Fridays I'm like, really, can't we just eat and not do the brachot and get it all done? I mean, it's like, really, like, of course I have ambivalence, like I'm human. So I think the idea that we look up, look down, look around is much more why they not only ask for meat, but they ask for seasonings, as you appropriately said. They wanted seasoned meat with garlic.
You know, I think that's a very astute observation of the nature of human beings, and I appreciate that. Thank you, Sherre. I will say that personally, it does not conform to my knowledge and experience of people of faith. The people of true faith that I have known in my life have it all the time. It doesn't mean that they aren't ever beaten down, but they have faith all the time. That means at any moment, they believe in God, they trust in God. Even at their worst moments, they trust in God. They're not people of faith and then on Tuesday they're atheists because they see something bad. there's a constancy to faith. That's why it's a rock. It's a wellspring. And the people I know who have had it, who have it, and who are like that, show it every single second of every single day.
So what if I posited, because I think you make a very interesting point, Marc. What if it's shades? It's that the bottom line, there's real faith, but that there's a variance between the intensity or the connection, or what, the Kabbalist uses devekut, that the cleaving that you feel. So it's not that you don't have, it's that the intensity or the connection is what changes. Because I think your point is well taken, because I would say, like in my own life, I feel like I'm a person of faith, but over the years it's been pushed, it's been questioned, it's been challenged, all those things. So it's more about intensity. It's not about either you have it or you don't.
So Miriam picks up the tambourine and starts to sing. And all of Israel starts to sing. And even Moshe, Az Yashir Moshe B'nai Israel, he starts to sing, and the whole people begin to celebrate. And we have what would in the movie business be the moment when the credits should roll and we should all go home. The Death Star has been destroyed. E.T. has gone home to his spaceship, right? Everything happens and it's all done. And that's the cinematic ending. And then the Torah, so wonderfully, so wise, takes us 3 days into the desert, and we start to kvetch again. And that's what Rabbi Gellman is pointing to. And he's exactly right. It's such an interesting paradox. It is the juxtaposition of these two images of people celebrating beautifully, singing and dancing their redemption, and then they're kvetching. And what are they kvetching about? These are people that have been slaves. They've been beaten. Their children had been stolen from them. Their elders had been humiliated. And Moshe liberates them from slavery. And they don't say thank you. They say burgers, chops, steaks. We want a grill, mixed grill, garlic. Sherry's right. Seasoning. Lowry's, seasoning, right. Marc, I think what we have here, first of all, is a beautiful psychological observation. The faster you get faith, the faster you lose faith. It's a beautiful psychological observation, but there's something even deeper. This is the seam line between two ways of looking at how you redeem people. There is a tradition of apocalyptic redemption, the Big Bang. All you need to do is lose your chains. We want a revolution, and the revolution will come, and we will throw off all that enslaves us, and the revolution will make us free. It is this one apocalyptic moment that will set us free from all that binds and bonds us, that binds us and keeps us from being the people we're meant to be. And that's one voice here in the Torah, and it's one voice in our culture. I mean, I remember as a kid, I grew up in the 60s, boy, power to the people, and we would throw off the man, and we would down the establishment, and we would establish freedom, and we would wear, work clothes and stand with the working people, and there would be equality, and there would be freedom, and there would be liberty, and there would be everything we wanted, and that was the 60s revolution. And the good news is that's inspiring. Boy, they write good songs. The best folk songs are revolutionary folk songs. And boy, does it inspire the young. But there's a problem with it. And the problem with it is that the human material out of which you need to make the utopian society is flawed and broken. And too easily does the revolutionary who believes in apocalyptic redemption become disillusioned, sad, dispirited, and too often becomes a tyrant. If you won't go along with my program, I will force you to go along with my program. And so there's this other voice in the Torah. It's the voice of amelioration. It's the voice of slow evolution, slow growth. You're not going to redeem a people with one big bang, even if it's God, even if it's the splitting of a sea. How are you going to do it? Step by step, mitzvah by mitzvah, act by act, slowly redeem the people. Because the process isn't only throwing off your chains. It's easier to get the people out of Egypt than to get to Egypt out of the people. You have to take a step by step and build a free, responsible people. And that's what the Torah is telling us here. 72 hours after the greatest miracle in all of human history, they're fetching for burgers. And that's the half-life of a miracle. What has to happen instead is a slow process. And Mount Sinai represents that slow process because it's a process of law. And law is a very slow instrument for changing human beings. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think faith has theophanies in it. It has dramatic experiences of God. And I think without them, it's very hard to have faith. But I think the reason for the radical movement in the Torah between doubt and faith is that they didn't believe in the right thing. They weren't really believing in God when they said Vayaminu Badonai. What the Torah really is saying on its higher secret level, I think, is they believed in God who was really just Pharaoh, just a stronger Pharaoh. And in fact, their song, and everyone is so happy with the song at the sea. I hate the song at the sea. One of the many things everyone loves that Gellman hates. I hate that song. And the reason I hate that song is what verse is in the song. Horse and rider, God has thrown into the sea. And you know the Midrash, the angels are cheering and God says, shut up, these are my creatures and they're dying and you shouldn't be cheering. So horse and rider he throws into the sea, Sus Barachba, Yiram Yiram, and then Adonai Ish Milchama, God is a man of war. Sorry, that's not my God. My God isn't a man of war. And so this song that they're singing is a song that could have been a song in praise of Pharaoh. So I just changed the name because it's the same. I believe what they're saying is I believe in the guy who did good things for us, who defeated our enemies in this world right now. And as long as he continues to make us winners, I believe in him. Well, guess what? That's not God. And the rabbis understood that, and the Christians understood that. They both understood that that's not the reason. So the rabbis have a praise to a God who doesn't have to prove God's presence in the world, and the Christians pray to a God who got crucified. So instead of praying to a God who's a military genius, they're praying to a God who is actually God, who is the source of virtue and truth, humility, kindness, love. And that God, the faith in that God cannot go away. And it can't be refuted by defeat, by military defeat. It can't be destroyed by any kind of destruction on earth. And the reason why the hope that faith offers can never be destroyed is that it is a hope for another world, not just this world, but the Olam Haba, the world to come. And it is in that world where the righteous will be rewarded, where evil will be completely punished, where you will be reunited with those whom you loved. Death will not separate you forever from them. And that's the faith that will never end. And as long as people can go to synagogues and never hear about Olam Haba, and never hear about world to come, and never hear about the hope after death, they will not return because they're being fed Twinkies. They're not being fed nutritious spiritual food. There's my rant for the.
Ooh. Speaking of Twinkies.
Is there really a segue there, Eddie?
I don't think so. Just say, Gellman, he's been writing for Golf Digest too long. Let's go on to another topic.
Well, when you said speaking of Twinkies, all I kept thinking is I liked ding dongs better.
Oh yeah. Well, that was an Eastern thing in the Midwest.
Marc, I don't look. I love the sermon and it's moving. I'm going to argue with you to this extent. I don't think that the world to come is the essence of this, although I deeply respect your faith in that. And I don't dispute it. I just don't think that's as central. I think the notion that redemption is possible, that a future is possible, that the way the world is not going to be, is not inevitable. The opposite of Judaism to me is the person who says the way things are is the way things have to be and nothing you can do about it. And I think that what you gain in this moment, and it's the reason why this moment is rehearsed every single day in our prayers, why this moment is celebrated so beautifully in Pesach, is because this opens a door to the possibility of a world made better. And that faith that the world is not built on paradoxes and incongruities that can never be mastered, but rather the world could be made better. We can find a way, and we can find the resources within ourselves to make ourselves better. That kind of faith to me is the faith. That's the faith. And you're right. There are going to be setbacks. And when the setbacks come, I mean, setbacks, look outside, 500,000 people, 400,000 people. It's going to be 500,000 in a couple of weeks, have died of this horror. And this week, you got vaccinated, I got vaccinated. That's you say, my God, look what we were able to do. Look at the heroism in scientists who went out and found this thing and they found this vaccine. And look at the heroism of doctors and nurses who fight this disease and push back death. I think it's not the faith in a world to come, although I deeply respect that. I think it's the faith in the possibilities inherent, imminent in this world. That's what this Torah is teaching.
But what if this world doesn't change, Ed? What if it substantially doesn't change? Look, the last time I heard such a beautiful, and it is beautiful, your sentiment that this world is changing and it's going to be okay and everything will be better.
It can be.
The most eloquent statement of that was the 18th and 19th century German idealist philosophy. Kant said that. Hegel said that. Fichte, Sherre.
Who am I to argue with guys like that?
100 million people are murdered in the next generation in the war. And so the truth is that this belief in science or belief in human perfectibility, it may not be true. It may be that we're just always going to be.
But the world to come may not be true.
Right,
the question is what narrative you choose to live.
That cannot be refuted.
What narrative do you choose to live is the question. Sherre, go ahead.
I think that's the question, Marc. It's that may not be true, but I want to live in a world where I and most people that I am with believe that it's possible. And yes, I don't know about the world to come, and I don't want to live in that world right now. So for now, this is the world that I want to imagine to be. It may not be true, but I'm going to do my damnedest or darndest or whatever the word is to make sure that I'm part of the people that are on the side of the belief that it can be better.
Well, yeah, absolutely. We all are. The question is, to what degree is your faith dependent upon this world changing for the better? That's my only point. And if it turns out, and the last century doesn't give you a lot of evidence to show on your side that the world is not getting better, I mean, then you have a question to answer, and that is, can you still have hope even in a world that is increasingly full of fanaticism and evil and death and disease? And even though you're doing the best you can, the truth is you need hope to survive the realities of human evil, and that hope has to come from somewhere. If it doesn't come from the earth, from the people in it, because the people aren't really giving you that kind of evidence, then it has to come from God. That's the choice religion presents. You can either believe in people, which is humanism, or you can believe in God, which is religion.
Yeah.
And if you believe in God, there's a reason that you believe in God and not in people. You believe that people have capacities, some exercise them for goodness, some are saintly, some are wonderful, and we want to support them and we want to be like them. Doesn't mean giving up on the world. When I talk to people who say, I don't want the world to come is pie in the sky when you die, I say, look, did Martin Luther King, did Gandhi, did Mother Teresa, do you think they gave up on the world? No, they were intimately involved in the world. And guess what? Guess what they believed in? Guess what they believed in? They believed in heaven.
Yeah.
They believed in a world beyond this world. So it is simply not true that if you are engaged in this world,
no, I'm not criticizing it that way.
World, that you can't believe in the world to come.
Okay. thank you. I appreciate the sermon. I appreciate the passion.
Okay.
And as much as I'd like to take another hour and really hash this out with you, and we're going to call our study. We have Shabbos coming, so let's finish with a simpler question, if that's okay, Rabbi. And Rabbi, it's Shabbos Shira. It's the Sabbath of song. And in this Parsha, it's the first great song that is sung. It's a song of redemption, a song of glory, a song of uplift. And it's sung first by Miriam. The women sing first. That is, they get it first. Marc, in your terms, the women are the ones who look up. The men are still looking at the mud. And the women begin to sing the song. And then Moshe begins singing the song. And finally, they get it. So here's the question. What song? What's the song that you listen to that gives you inspiration, that lifts you up, that reminds you why you're in the world, that tells you that there are possibilities? What song do you listen to? Do you hold as this? What's the song that you carry with you and you find yourself singing in the shower when you need to know that life is filled with possibilities? Sherre, you got a song that you love?
I'm struck by the question because it's Shabbos Shira and my Hebrew name is Shira. So I've always.
Oh, well, there it's your Shabbos then.
It's
please.
my Shabbos. Shabbat HaGadol is my bat mitzvah Parsha, and Shira is my namesake. So I have like particular attachment to this one. You know, it goes through phases. I mean, music and I are in a ongoing relationship. So, I mean, I love the song Fight Song by Rachel Platten, Jewish girl. I love that song. And sometimes when I need a big fire up in belief and hope, I see that song in my head.
What's it called? What's it called?
Fight Song by Rachel Platten, a nice Jewish girl.
Rachel Platten?
Platten, Platten.
Okay.
She's a well-known artist.
Yeah, well known if in a certain generation, yeah.
Well, remind
Right.
you, I'm not in the generation.
I know. I'm giving you credit.
And if I was younger, I would be like in the Dua Lipa or the Smoke Perp or something like that. So I'm sure that younger people were looking at me like, gosh, she's so yesterday. So
That's true. That's okay. I'm even farther yesterday. And Gellman is a whole nother century.
No.
Gellman, what song that lifts you up?
Well, I was actually listening this afternoon and dancing around in honor of the Parsha, dancing around my study. And I was listening to two of my favorite songs, Desperado by Linda Ronstadt. And the verse I'm singing and screaming is, it may be raining, but there's a rainbow above you. You got to let somebody love you. You got to let somebody love you before it's too late.
Ooh. Thank you. And I'm a 60s kid. So for me, I like I like both sides of the first Crosby, Stills, Nash album. And the song that begins the second side. Now, for those of you who don't know what albums are, I'm sorry, but the first song on the second side of the album is called Wooden Ships. And it's a post-Holocaust meditation after the Great War. And two opposing soldiers turn to each other and say, I see by your coat you're from the other side. There's just one thing I got to know: who won? And it's a sense of, number one, that no one's going to win the next war. And number two, that even if there is one, God forbid, we can find solidarity in the shadows of the destruction. I hope everyone is well this week. We celebrate Shabbos Shira, so listen to the song. Fill yourself with glory. Thank you, Sherre. Thank you, Marc. Thank you to everyone who's joined us. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.